The city had barely woken up, but already the sidewalks were thrumming with movement. Hannah Lassen threaded her way through the rush, her canvas satchel bumping against her hip with each hurried step. The crisp bite of early autumn wrapped around her cheeks and nipped at her nose, but she barely registered the chill. Her gaze was locked on the glowing red numbers of the crosswalk signal, counting down like a mocking reminder. She was late. Again, the Moonstone Cafe place of both employment and constant anxiety was a mere 3 blocks away. But at the pace she was going, it felt like miles. She had already missed the early bus, and the second one had been delayed after an accident to steps down. Now, 20 minutes passed when she was supposed to clock in. She was bracing herself for the look her manager, Claire, would give her, the one that said, "I like you, Hannah, but there's only so much I can excuse." Her phone buzzed. She didn't need to check to know who it was. One glance confirmed Itmer Klein, her landlord. Rent due 3 days late. $300 short again. Hannah exhaled sharply, her stomach nodding. Even with 2 part-time jobs waitressing here and occasionally painting commission portraits, when clients found Hirsch was drowning. The city was beautiful in a cinematic, skyline postcard kind of way. But it had claws, and they dug deepest into those who had the least. By the time she pushed through the Moonstone's polished glass doors, the scent of freshly ground coffee and warm croissants enveloped her like a gentle reprieve. She inhaled deeply, trying to gather herself. Maybe if she moved fast enough and smiled brightly enough, Claire would skip the lecture. "Hannah," Claire murmured as she swept by carrying a tray of pastries. Her voice was low, but the steel in it was unmistakable. "I know," Hannah whispered back, tying her apron with swift, practiced hands. "I'm sorry. The bus. Save it. Just be quick." The place was already alive with its usual weekday rhythm. The Moonstone catered to the city's upper-crust sharp suits, pressed dresses, and whispered deals worth more than Hannah could fathom. She moved between the gleaming marble counter and the tables with her notepad ready, reminding herself to keep her shoulders back and her smile in place. She was balancing a tray with 3 cappuccinos when it happened. Her sneaker caught on a slightly raised tile, a flaw she'd meant to report weeks ago. The tray tilted, time slowed, and in the surreal half-second before disaster struck, she saw the inevitable unfold. The cups tipped, steam spiraled into the air, then impact. Hot coffee splashed across the immaculate white shirt of the man seated alone in the corner booth. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." Hannah's voice cracked as she scrambled for napkins from the nearest table. She expected an outburst, anger, a scalding rebuke in keeping with the temperature of the liquid she'd just dumped on him. Instead, when the man stood, shaking droplets from his sleeves, she found dark eyes regarding her with amusement. "It's all right," he said in a voice that was calm, almost warm. He accepted the napkins she thrust toward him without flinching. "Accidents happen." Hannah, still mortified, finally looked at him properly. He was tall, early 30s perhaps, with dark hair that looked casually disheveled, but somehow deliberate, a jawline sharp enough to belong in a glossy magazine, and a watch that she was fairly certain cost more than she made in 6 months. The way he carried himself confident, but not overbearing, spoke of someone accustomed to control. "No, it's not all right," she insisted, dabbing at his shirt despite his gentle resistance. "This looks expensive. I'll pay for the cleaning or replace cement whatever it takes." He caught her wrist lightly, halting her frantic attempts. His touch was surprisingly gentle, a contrast to the boardroom authority he likely exuded elsewhere. "Really, it's fine. I have others. Others like this one probably cost more than my rent," she muttered before she could stop herself. One of his brows arched. "You might be surprised." Before she could say anything more, Claire materialized, her expression one part apology, one part panic. "Sir, I am so sorry about this. Your coffee and pastry are on the house, of course, and we'll cover any cleaning costs." "That's not necessary," the man replied smoothly. "As I said, these things happen." Claire shot Hannah a look that said get back to work, then retreated. But Hannah didn't leave. She lingered, shifting awkwardly, still burdened with guilt. I really am sorry, she repeated. It's just been a rough morning. Something flickered in his eyes. Curiosity. Rough morning? He gestured toward the empty chair opposite him. She hesitated. She was on the clock, but his calm, patient presence was oddly disarming. Slowly, she sat. My landlord's threatening eviction, my roof leaks, and my art supplies got ruined in last night's rain. And now I've spilled coffee on, well, someone who probably owns half the city. She laughed lightly, the sound tinged with bitterness. I'm an artist trained to babe you. Mostly I'm just a waitress who paints when she can. What kind of art? He asked, leaning forward slightly. There was no politeness for politeness' sake in his tone. He genuinely wanted to know. Portraits, she said. Faces tell stories, lines, expressions, they hold years of experiences. I try to capture that. He studied her for a moment, as though seeing something others missed. Then, without a word, he stood and stepped a few paces away, pulling out his phone to make a quiet call. She strained, but couldn't catch his words. When he returned, he placed a simple cream-colored business card on a table. One word, Lucas. Beneath it, a phone number. That's it, she asked, brow furrowing. Just a first name. Names have power, he said with a faint smile. Sometimes it's better to know the person before you know the reputation. From his wallet, he produced several crisp $100 bills and set them beside the card. Her eyes widened. What's this for? Your art supplies. Consider it an investment in your talent. I can't accept this. I don't even know you. You will, if you call. He stood, his presence suddenly larger than the space they occupied. I'd like to see your work sometime. As for the shirt, it'll survive. Some of the best stories start with coffee stains. And just like that, he was gone, leaving Hannah with the faint scent of his cologne, $500 in cash, and a simple card with a single name. That night, the Moonstone Cafe felt like a memory Hannah was still replaying in her head. The rush, the spill, the stranger's calm smile all blurred together in a way that didn't feel entirely real. Back in her apartment, the familiar creak of the door hinges and the faint scent of drying oil paints grounded her again. She set her satchel down on the small kitchen table, and there it was, 5 crisp $100 bills fanned out like a silent dare. Beside the simple cream card with one word and a number, Lucas. She sat in the one mismatched chair that didn't wobble, elbows on the table, staring at the money. Her mind swung between temptation and suspicion. $500 could replace her ruined brushes, her set of professional grade paints, even the easel she'd been using since high school. It could buy her breathing room with rent. It could give her a week without the constant gnaw of worry in her stomach. But it wasn't earned, not in the way she believed in earning things. It wasn't payment for work completed. It wasn't a commission. It was charity given by someone she'd known for less than 30 minutes. And yet, Hannah pressed her palms together, leaning her forehead against them. Charity was one thing, an investment, as he'd called it, was something else. The words still echoed in her mind, calm and certain. Consider it an investment in your talent. Her phone rang, startling her. She glanced at the screen. Unknown number. She almost ignored a tongue. Now numbers usually meant telemarketers or wrong calls, but something made her swipe to answer. Hello, it's Lucas, said a familiar voice, low and easy. She blinked. How did you get my number? When you were figuring out the cleaning costs for my shirt, you wrote it on your order pad. I kept it. There was a hint of humor in his tone, as though he could hear her raised eyebrow over the line. Oh, she hesitated, caught between being flattered and mildly uneasy. Right, I forgot about that. Have dinner with me tomorrow night. The request landed without preamble, confident in a way that assumed she'd say yes. I don't even know your last name, she replied before she could think better of it. Does it matter? She thought about that. Most people she met led with their credentials, their affiliations, their worth measured in LinkedIn titles or social introductions. This man was the opposite. His mystery was deliberate and oddly refreshing. She bit her lip. Okay, she said, surprising herself. Good, I'll pick you up at 7. And with that, he was gone, leaving her with the faint echo of his voice and a strange flutter in her chest. The next evening arrived faster than she expected. At precisely 7, a discreet black sedan pulled up in front of her building. It wasn't the kind of ostentatious car she imagined for a man like him, no glassy sports model or gleaming chrome beast. It was understated, quietly expensive. When he stepped out, dressed in dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that looked effortless yet was clearly tailored, she noticed again how he wore wealth like it was an afterthought, not a display, but a tool. "You look beautiful," he said simply, opening the passenger door for her. She glanced down at her knee-length navy dress, her one good pair of heels, hair pinned back in a loose twist. She debated overdressing or underdressing and landed somewhere in the middle. "Thanks," she murmured, sliding into the seat. They drove for 20 minutes, leaving behind the city's glaring lights and glass towers for a quieter neighborhood. The restaurant he led her into was a world away from the Moonstone's polished marble. It had checkered tablecloths, flickering candles, and wine bottles, and the gentle hum of Italian music in the background. "This is cozy," she said, looking around at the warm-toned walls lined with photographs of smiling families and old country landscapes. "Sometimes the best treasures are hidden in plain sight," Lucas replied, pulling out her chair before taking the one opposite. A bottle of deep red wine appeared at the table without him even placing an order. The waiter poured with reverence, as if serving royalty. They talked, at first about art, though she found her inspiration in the details of a person's face, how she saw beauty in the tiniest imperfection. Then about life in the city, her favorite coffee blend, the books she would read when she needed comfort. He listened not the way people often did, half distracted and nodding at intervals, but fully. His gaze stayed on her, his questions thoughtful, his silences comfortable. When dessert arrived, a single piece of tiramisu, they shared it, the delicate layers melting on her tongue. "Tell me about your family," she said, her curiosity getting the better of her. His expression shifted, guarded for the first time. "My father passed away 5 years ago. He was in business. Complicated man. My mother lives in Italy now. I'm sorry." He shrugged faintly. He was successful, but complicated. The way he said it told her there was more to the story, but she didn't press. "What about you?" he asked. "Just my mom and me," Hannah said. "She's worked as a housekeeper for wealthy families most of her life. She gave up everything to make sure I had opportunities she never did. She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She is. She'd probably faint if she knew I was having dinner with someone like you. Someone like me." She gestured lightly at him, at the candlelit table, at the wine that probably cost more than her week's groceries. "Someone who can whisk strangers into hidden restaurants and make it seem normal." He reached across the table, his hand closing over hers with warmth that surprised her. "Tonight, I'm just Lucas, and you're just Hannah. Nothing else matters." After dinner, he walked her back to her building. The contrast between the cozy restaurant and her weathered brick apartment was stark, but he didn't seem to notice or didn't care. "I had a wonderful time," she said at her door. "So did I." He stepped closer, the space between them humming with something electric. His sense something subtle and expensive wrapped around her senses. "Hannah," he murmured, lifting a hand to cup her cheek. She looked up at him, heart drumming in her chest. When his lips touched hers, it was gentle at first, testing, then deepened when she leaned in. For a moment, the noise of the city, the worry about rent, the leaking roofful of it disappeared. When they broke apart, she was startled to feel tears sliding down her cheeks. His expression shifted immediately. "Did I do something wrong?" She shook her head, wiping quickly at her eyes. "No, it's not you, it's me." "What is it?" he asked softly, brushing away the last traces of her tears with his thumbs. She took a breath that shivered at the edges. "The last time someone like you paid attention to me, it didn't end well. Someone like me, wealthy, powerful, charming." She dropped her gaze. "When I was 18, I worked at a country club. One of the members, a businessman in his 40s, noticed me. He made me feel special. For months, he pursued me, showered me with gifts, promises. I thought he loved me, but he was married. When his wife found out, he denied everything, called me delusional. His friends backed his story. I lost my job. My mom had to leave town because of the gossip. Lucas's jaw tightened. Not every man with money is like that. I know that here, she said, pressing a hand lightly to her temple. But my heart, it doesn't trust easily. They stood in silence, her confession lingering in the space between them. I should go inside, she murmured finally. Will you see me again? She looked at him, saw something in his eyes, sincerity, maybe even the seed of something deeper. Call me tomorrow, she said quietly, and slipped inside. 3 weeks passed like pages turning in a book Hannah didn't want to end. Her evenings had begun to follow a rhythm she hadn't experienced in years. Lucas would meet her after her shift at the Mintstone, sometimes waiting outside in the discreet black sedan, sometimes leaning casually against the cafe's brick wall with his hands in his pockets. They'd wander through hidden corners of the city pocket parks no one else seemed to notice, narrow streets where ivy clung to crumbling brick, little shops that stayed open late just because the owners loved their work. They ate at places that didn't appear on any restaurant guide, some so small they only had 4 tables. They talked until the street lamps flickered on and the city softened into night. It was easy to fall into something that felt like more than just infatuation. The way he listened when she spoke, the way his gaze lingered not on what she wore or how she looked, but on her as though she was the only person in the room. Lucas had become her calm in the storm, and yet, she realized later, there were gaps and omissions in the tapestry he'd woven between them. He'd say he was in business, but never specify what kind. He'd mention travel, but never the reason. If she pressed, he'd smile and change the subject, asking her about her art or a book she'd mentioned. At the time, she'd let it go. Some people guarded their lives out of habit. She thought she understood. It was a Tuesday morning when everything changed. Hannah was arranging a vase of fresh dahlias in the Mintstone's front window when she heard a burst of commotion outside, the kind of noise that didn't belong on their usually quiet block. She turned to look. Across the street, a sleek black limousine had pulled to the curb. A cluster of reporters surged forward like a wave breaking, cameras flashing, voices shouting over each other. Mr. Vaughn, how do you respond to the merger allegations? Lucas Vaughn, will Vaughn Tech be acquiring the startup? Mr. Vaughn overheard just one statement. Her heart stuttered. Lucas Vaughn. The name punched through her thoughts like a stone through glass. She pressed her palm to the cool window pane and watched as the man she'd been falling in love with emerged from the limousine, flanked by 2 suited security guards. Gone was the casual sweater, the quiet confidence she knew. This man wore a perfectly tailored suit, the fabric catching the light like liquid midnight. His watch gleamed at his wriststone she now recognized as a rare limited edition. Even the way he moved was different, each step sure and deliberate, as if the pavement itself bent to his will. This wasn't just a wealthy man. This was someone whose name was currency, whose face had been on the covers of financial magazines she'd seen in grocery store racks. Her breath came shallow. She grabbed her phone and typed his name. Headlines filled her screen. Tech billionaire Lucas Vaughn closes to point for $1 billion deal. Vaughn empire expands into AI development. Youngest self-made billionaire reshaping multiple industries. She read them twice, 3 times, as if repetition would make them less sharp, less cutting. The man who had shown up in jeans and a sweater, who claimed to be in business without elaboration, had hidden an entire identity from her, and not just hidden, he'd crafted a version of himself that felt curated. The dinners in quiet restaurants, the modest car, the absence of designer flash, all a performance. That evening, she waited for him in the small park near her apartment. She didn't text or call. You sat on the bench where they'd shared coffee and long conversations, her mind replaying every moment, every omission. When Lucas arrived, she saw details she'd missed before, the precise cut of his casual jacket, the subtle confidence in his stride, the way his eyes flicked across the park, scanning in a way that suggested trained awareness. You lied to me, she said before he could speak. He stopped mid-step. What do you mean? She met his gaze, her own steady despite the ache in her chest. Lucas Vaughn, CEO of Vaughn Technologies. Net worth $4.2 billion according to Forbes. Ring any bells? His shoulders lowered slightly, as though the weight of a mask had finally become too heavy. Hannah, I can explain. Explain what? That you've been playing dress up for 3 weeks. That you pretended to be someone you're not. That you let me feel sorry for spilling coffee on your expensive shirt when you probably own 100 just like it. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? She demanded. Should I start calling you Mr. Vaughn now? He raked a hand through his hair in unguarded gesture she used to find endearing. Now it felt calculated, a habit meant to make him appear human, approachable. I wanted you to know me, not my bank account, he said. Do you have any idea how rare it is for someone to look at me and just see a person? So you decided to lie instead. I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you everything. Hannah gave a short, bitter laugh. There is a difference between not mentioning you like jazz and not mentioning you're one of the richest men in the country. Would you have given me a chance if you'd known? The question hung there, raw and dangerous. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. They both knew the truth. That's not the point, she said finally. The point is that you took away my choice. You manipulated the situation to get what you wanted. I fell in love with you, he said quietly. Her throat tightened. No, you fell in love with the idea of someone who didn't know who you were. You fell in love with playing pretend. They stood there in the dim light, the air between them heavy with things unsaid. If you'd asked her an hour earlier, she might have believed they were building something real. Now she wasn't sure if she even knew who he was. And yet, even in the sting of betrayal, her heart betrayed her because it still wanted to believe him. Hannah didn't remember walking home from the park. One moment she was standing under the dim glow of the lamppost, her words to Lucas hanging in the air like smoke. The next, she was at her kitchen table, staring blankly at the chipped surface as if the grain of the wood might offer answers she didn't have. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Outside, the city was its usual restless self-sirens in the distance, the low murmur of passing voices, a car horn sharp enough to make her flinch. She heard the knock before she saw her mother's familiar figure in the doorway. Rosa Lawson stepped in with a steaming container in hand, wearing the same faded cardigan she always did on cooler nights. Her dark hair, streaked with silver, was pulled into a low bun. She glanced at her daughter and frowned. Mija, you look like you've seen a ghost, Rosa said, setting the container on a table. Worse, Hannah murmured, pushing out a chair for her. I've been dating a lie. Rosa's eyes narrowed. What happened? Hannah tried to keep her voice steady, but the bitterness slipped through. She told her everything about Lucas, about his real name, about Vaughn Technologies, and the billions he'd kept hidden under the quiet weight of a man who supposedly didn't care for wealth. Her mother's face shifted as she spoke, first confusion, then realization, and then something darker. Lucas Vaughn, Rosa repeated, her voice quieter now. Yes, Hannah said. Do you know the name? Rosa sat down heavily. Her hands trembled slightly as she set her spoon aside. For a long moment, she just stared at the tabletop, her mouth tightening as though she were holding back words she kept buried for years. There's something I never told you about your father, she said finally. Hannah's breath caught. In all her life, her mother had spoken about her father sparingly, almost reluctantly. He was a shadow in Hannah's mind, warm in the photographs, gone before she could remember him. What do you mean? Rose's gaze softened, though the pain behind it was unmistakable. Your father, Miguel, was a construction worker. He was good at his job, careful, always the first to follow safety rules. 25 years ago, he was hired to work on a luxury hotel project. Hannah felt the first twist of unease in her stomach. The project was owned by Vaughn Development, Rosa continued, her voice growing taut. At that time, it was run by Vincent Vaughn, Lucas's father. Hannah's pulse thudded in her ears. What happened? There was an accident, Rosa said, and her voice cracked on the word. Faulty scaffold the company had been warned about. The warnings were ignored because fixing it would have delayed the project and cost money. One day, it collapsed. Your father fell for stories. Hannah's eyes burned. He died, not immediately. Rose's own eyes shimmered. He lingered in the hospital for 2 months, paralyzed, in constant pain. You were 3 months old when it happened. Hannah's mind reeled, the room tilting slightly as if the walls had shifted around her. Why didn't you ever tell me this? She asked, her voice shaking. Because I didn't want you to carry the weight of that kind of hatred. And because Rosa hesitated, looking away. Because Vincent Vaughn made sure no one could fight him. He covered it up, said the workers hadn't followed safety protocols. He had lawyers, money, influence. We had nothing, but there must have been an investigation. Rosa let out a humorless laugh. The investigators were bought. The other workers were threatened with deportation if they testified. Vaughn Development walked away without a scratch. I was left with hospital bills I could never repay and a baby to raise alone. Hannah's chest tightened until she thought she might not be able to breathe. All those years, she whispered, and now I've been falling for the son of the man who destroyed our family. Rosa reached for her hand. Lucas is not his father, but the pain, the damage, that's real, and it's ours to carry. Hannah stared at their joined hands, her mind caught between the man she'd come to know and the legacy he'd inherited. The irony was so sharp it almost felt cruel, like the universe had orchestrated some twisted reunion, binding her to the family name she should have despised. He has to know, she said finally, about my father, about what happened. Rosa's grip tightened. Why would he? To him, it was just another project, another casualty they could afford to ignore. People like Vincent Vaughn, they don't remember the names of the lives they break. Hannah's voice hardened. Maybe his son should, but even as she said it, she felt the deep, unsteady conflict within herself. If she told Lucas, would it change anything? Would he even career? Would his loyalty to his family outweigh the truth? The next morning, Hannah tried to lose herself in the familiar rituals of her tiny apartment. Coffee brewed slowly in her second-hand French press. Sunlight caught in the dust motes drifting across the kitchen, and the rhythmic brush of her paint against canvas gave her something to focus on besides the ache in her chest. It didn't work. Her phone had been buzzing since dawn. Texts and missed calls from Lucas she hadn't answered. The words from the night before still sat raw in her mind. You lied to me. The look on his face when she'd said it. The way her mother's voice had trembled as she spoke of Miguel Lawson's death. The universe had a cruel sense of timing, she thought, as a sharp knock interrupted her thoughts. When she opened the door, the woman standing there looked as though she had stepped out of a business magazine. Late 20s, sleek dark hair in a neat twist, a charcoal skirt suit tailored to perfection. Hannah Lawson, the woman asked, her tone polite but direct. Yes, I'm Elena Marquez. I'm Lucas's executive assistant and his closest confidant. She paused, glancing down the hallway before adding, May I come in? I think you deserve to know the whole truth. Hannah hesitated. Every instinct screamed to send her away, but something in the woman's eyes, a mix of urgency and sincerity, made her step aside. They sat at the small kitchen table, the one that had borne so many of Hannah's late-night worries. Elena didn't waste time. Lucas doesn't know about your family connection, she said. I've worked for him for 5 years. And in all that time, I've never seen him as happy as he's been these past few weeks. Hannah crossed her arms. How do you know about my family at all? Eleanor reached into her leather briefcase and pulled out a tablet. With a few swipes, she brought up a documentary detailed report that made Hannah's stomach twist. I run background checks on everyone who gets close to Lucas, Elena said. It's part of my job to protect him. When I discovered the connection between your father's death and Vaughn Development, I didn't tell him immediately. I decided to investigate further first. You decided? Hannah's voice held a note of accusation. So you knew this whole time? I knew there was a connection, Elena corrected gently. But what I didn't know was the truth about what happened on that construction site. She swiped to another document and turned the screen so Hannah could see. The pages were filled with legal jargon, dates, and signatures. When Lucas took over Vaughn Technologies, Eleanor explained, one of his first priorities was reforming company policy. He implemented the strictest safety protocols in the industry. He also allocated millions of his personal fortune to compensate families harmed by his father's business practices. That doesn't erase what Vincent Vaughn did, Hannah said flatly. No, it doesn't, but Lucas isn't his father. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice low and steady. Vincent was ruthless, manipulative, obsessed with profit over people. Lucas is the opposite. He's been quietly paying settlements to victims' families for years, many of them anonymously. He's established charity foundations in the names of workers who died on Vaughn projects. Hannah frowned, her gaze drawn to the tablet despite herself. There were list names she didn't recognize, dates spanning decades, amounts that staggered her. He doesn't even know about most of these cases specifically, Eleanor continued. He told me to find every family we wronged and make it right. Your family should have been on that list. But the records were buried so deep it took me 3 weeks to uncover them. Hannah sat back, her breath uneven. So he's been trying to atone for his father's sins. Eleanor nodded. And more than they'd been trying to prove he's nothing like the man who raised him. Silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of everything Hannah had just learned. Her mind replayed every conversation she'd had with Lucas, every moment when he'd listened to her talk about her art, her struggles, her past, never once revealing that he'd been carrying his own shadow. Why are you telling me this now? Hannah asked finally. Because I think you're about to make a decision you can't undo, Elena said, and you should make it knowing the truth, not just the history, not just the pain, but the man he really is today. Hannah walked Eleanor to the door, her thoughts spinning. Part of her wanted to cling to the Ingrid was simpler than sorting through the tangle of emotions clawing at her. But now the lines weren't as clean. Lucas Vaughn wasn't just the heir to her father's tragedy. He was also the man who had spent years quietly undoing the damage his family had caused. And that made her next choice infinitely harder. The knock came barely an hour after Elena left. Hannah was still pacing her small living room, replaying every word, every piece of evidence she'd been shown. When the sound echoed against her apartment door, she froze. A part of her thought Hepatite might be Lucas. But when she opened the door, the man standing there was not anyone she expected. Mid-40s, tall, with silver at his temples and a face that carried both polish and a faint air of entitlement. His suit was immaculate, dark as midnight. The tie knotted with precision, but it wasn't the clothes that caught her attention, it was the eyes. Cool gray, sharp as cut glass, scanning her with the measured interest of someone assessing the value of an object rather than meeting a person. Hannah Lassen, he said in a voice that rolled like fine whiskey smooth, but with a burn beneath. I'm James Thornfield. May I come in? Every instinct in her screamed no. But somehow he was already stepping across the threshold, moving with the confidence of a man who was rarely told he couldn't do something. He seated himself on her small couch, as if it belonged to him, and crossed one leg over the other. I hear you've recently discovered the truth about your boyfriend, he began, the pause before the last word deliberate, almost mocking. What do you want? Hannah asked, staying on her feet, arms folded tightly. To offer you an opportunity for justice. The word justice made something in her chest tighten. From beside him, he placed a sleek leather briefcase on the coffee table. The sound of the clasp snapping open was too loud in the quiet room. Inside was a neat stack of folders, their edges crisp and their contents carefully organized. What is this? Evidence, he said simply, enough to destroy Lucas Vaughn's reputation and his company. Hannah's eyes narrowed. What kind of evidence? Financial irregularities, questionable business practices, offshore connections, nothing technically illegal, but more than enough to raise serious questions about his integrity. Delivered to the right people, it would erode public trust and collapse the empire his father built. She studied his face. There was no altruism there, no genuine desire to set right a wrong. His was the smile of a man who saw opportunity in other people's pain. And what do you get out of this? She asked. He leaned back, unbothered. Justice for your father. Lucas's company killed him directly or indirectly. The result is the same. I imagine you've spent your life wishing there was a way to make them pay. Now there is. That's not an answer, she said flatly. He gave a faint, humorless smile. Lucas is in my way. Bringing him down benefits me, yes. But it also gives you closure. We can help each other. Hannah's gaze drifted to the folders. Her mother's face flashed in her Minto's nights spent hunched over unpaid bills. The sacrifices she'd made, the knowledge that Miguel Lawson had been written off as collateral damage. Part of her wanted to grab the briefcase, to deliver it herself to the press, to watch the Vaughn name crumble. But then she remembered the quiet evenings with Lucas, the way he listened, the way his hand felt wrapped around hers. She remembered Elena's voice, steady and certain, explaining how Lucas had spent years making amends, how his actions had been deliberate and genuine. And she remembered the difference in Lucas's eyes compared to the man sitting before her. I need time to think, she said finally, keeping her tone guarded. Thornfield nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that answer. Don't take too long. Opportunities like this, they don't come around often. With that, he closed the briefcase, stood, and let himself out. The faint scent of his cologne lingered like an unwelcome ghost. When the door shut, Hannah stayed standing in the middle of the room for a long moment, as if movement might tip her over the edge of a decision she wasn't ready to make. On the table sat his business card stark white, the name James Thornfield embossed in raised black letters. Beside it, the memory of Elena's tablet and Lucas's quiet determination loomed large. Justice or trust, revenge or forgiveness. The line between them had never felt so thin. The park felt different at night. The same park where she had confronted Lucas just days ago was now washed in the amber glow of street lamps, the shadows stretching long over the grass. The bench she sat on felt colder than she remembered, but that might have been the ache in her chest rather than the October air. Her phone buzzed in her hand. Another text from Lucas. Please let me explain. Nothing between us was fake except my name. My feelings for you are real. She stared at the message for a long time. She typed a reply, erased it, typed again, and erased that too. Words felt too small for the storm inside her. Finally, she wrote, I can't see you anymore. It's too complicated. The response came almost instantly. Don't let my father's mistakes destroy what we have. I love you, Hannah. The words hit her like a blow, not because she doubted them, but because she believed the man believing them made everything harder. Tears blurred her vision as she typed her final message. Sometimes love isn't enough. Goodbye, Lucas. She pressed send and closed her eyes, willing herself not to crumble. She rose from the bench and began the slow walk home, her arms wrapped around herself as if she could hold in the pieces of her breaking heart. She didn't notice the black sedan parked half a block away, or the figure in the driver's seat watching her go. Lucas sat in the shadows, his hands gripping the steering wheel. He'd been there for nearly an hour, rehearsing what he might say if she gave him the chance. But as he watched her walk away, shoulders slumped under an invisible weight, he knew he'd lost her at least for now. Back in her apartment, the quiet felt heavier than usual. Hannah moved automatically, turning on a lamp, setting her phone on the counter, and sitting at the table where Thornfield's business card still lay. One call, that was all it would take. One call to tip the balance, to hand over the ammunition that could destroy Lucas's world. Her fingers hovered above the card, but she didn't touch it. Elena's words came back to her in sharp clarity. He's not his father. He's spent years trying to repair the damage Vincent Vaughn caused. She thought of the way Lucas had looked at her, the kind of look you couldn't fake. She thought of his voice when he talked about doing what was right, even if it cost him. Vincent Vaughn had destroyed her family's life, but Lucas Von Lucas had been trying to build something better, something cleaner. Even if he'd kept the truth of his name from her, was it fair to punish the son for the father's sins? She sat like that for a long time, the city lights blinking outside her window like distant stars. Somewhere out there, Lucas was probably staring at the ceiling of a penthouse she now knew existed, wondering if he'd ever see her again. And here she was, wondering the same thing. Lucas Vaughn hadn't slept in 3 days. The city outside his penthouse office sparkled under a late-night drizzle, but he barely noticed. The desk before him was littered with half-empty coffee cups, open folders, and crumpled sheets of paper that had been discarded in frustration. His tie hung loose, the top buttons of his shirt undone. The past 72 hours had been a blur of calls to legal teams, late-night dives into the company archives, an endless mental replay of Hannah's voice as she told him goodbye. She hadn't said, "I don't love you." She'd said sometimes love isn't enough, and Lucas intended to find out exactly why. Elena entered without knocking. She was one of the few people allowed that liberty. Her eyes were sharp despite the hour, a thick folder clutched under her arm. "I found something," she said, setting it down in front of him. The Miguel Lassen case wasn't just covered up, it was deliberately buried by someone with internal access. Lucas straightened, his fatigue momentarily forgotten. "What do you mean?" "The original safety reports," Eleanor explained, flipping the folder open. 3 weeks before the accident, the site inspector filed multiple warnings about faulty scaffolding. Those warnings were deleted from the system and replaced with falsified all-clear reports. Lucas's jaw clenched. "My father," she shook her head. "No, the digital signatures don't match." Whoever did this wanted Vincent Vaughn to take the public blame for negligence, but not because they were protecting him. Lucas stared at her. "Who?" Elena turned a page, revealing a familiar name on the project manager's log. James Thornfield. The name landed like a lead weight in the room. Lucas leaned back slowly, his eyes narrowing. "He was the project manager on the Lawson construction site," Elena said. "If the original reports had surfaced, Thornfield would have been held criminally responsible for ignoring them. So he destroyed the evidence seen, let your father's reputation take the fall." Lucas's mind began connecting threads that had been loose for years. Thornfield had been around his family's business for decades, always managing to sidestep serious consequences when projects went wrong. Lucas had inherited him along with the rest of the company when Vincent died, never realizing just how deep the man's corruption went. "Worse than that," Eleanor continued, sliding another document forward. "I've been tracking Thornfield's business dealings. Every time he's faced potential legal trouble, a Vaughn development project has conveniently taken the heat. He's been using your family name as a shield for years." Lucas's hands curled into fists. "He let Miguel Lawson die, and Hannah's family paid the price for decades." He stood abruptly, the tension radiating off him. "Get me everything: financial records, business ties, communications, offshore accounts. If Thornfield thinks he can walk away from this, he's about to learn otherwise." For the next several hours, Lucas and Elena worked in grim silence, piecing together the paper trail. What emerged was a map of quiet corruption payments hidden in shell companies, contracts funneled through shadow partnerships, safety violations scrubbed from official records. The more Lucas read, the more the image of his father as the sole villain fractured. Vincent Vaughn had been ruthless, yes, but James Thornfield had been every bit as destructive, had just learned to stay in the shadows. By dawn, Lucas had a plan. "This ends now," he said, voice steady with resolve. "Not just for me, for Hannah, for her father, for every family that man has destroyed while hiding behind my last name." Eleanor nodded. "What about Hannah?" Lucas looked away toward the city skyline, the light just beginning to break over the horizon. "First, I make this right. Then I hope she'll see the man I really am."